Welcome to the Relational Recovery Podcast. I'm your host, Wes Thompson, joined by my co-host, Austin Hill. Today we are talking about the importance of faith in recovery. So we hope this conversation is helpful, and thanks for listening. Hey, Austin.
Hey, Wes. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks, man. I want to talk today about faith in recovery. What does it mean to be a Christian? And what role does faith have in recovery? This short conversation, I want to be clear up front. It's going to be aimed more at newer Christians or people who are not Christians. So if you are a Christian or if you've been a Christian for a long time, this conversation I think would be, I still think it's going to be helpful, but it's really aimed at, again, non-Christians, newer Christians. When I think about faith, I think a lot of people are familiar with like AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and they talk about a higher power, and that's presenting this idea of faith. Christianity takes that idea a bit further, right? Because Christians follow the teachings and the ways of Jesus Christ that we find in the Christian Bible. And again, as a means to just set this up a bit more, there's a lot of Christian churches. Not all of them are the same. Many of them have different names, different traditions. Someone listening might be familiar with the word, denominations. So these are different groups of Christians, and they're grouped based on their particular interpretation of the Christian Bible and how to appropriately live out the Christian faith. But what binds most of them is the belief that Jesus Christ is who he said he was, the Son of God, and the one by which we can all find salvation, hope, and meaning for our life and future. And so for someone who's skeptical of faith or who isn't a Christian, I think it's important to point out some of the ways that we believe faith is helpful in recovery. I know I have a friend, Rich Thompson, who's getting his PhD on this topic right now at Ohio State, and I'm not going to be referencing his data here. I'm not speaking necessarily even from a scientific perspective this morning, but rather a personal and somewhat philosophical one. So that's what we're going to talk about this morning. Before we jump in any further, do you have any thoughts or any comments at this point?
Yeah, I think that it's for those of us who grew up in church or who have a really positive outlook on it, like they really like this idea of faith, and for people who've been hurt by churches, I think the emphasis that I would want to make is making sure that when we're talking about faith, it's who we're putting our faith in. And from our context and what our belief system that you and I share, it's like our faith is in this guy who is Jesus. And then we do our best, a very imperfect, messy attempt at trying to live a life like that. So it's giving yourself enough. If you did grow up in church and you have a bad taste in your mouth from it, that's normal, not to be afraid of. But it's focusing on who we're putting our trust and faith in. So,
and I think, there's a lot to this. There's a lot of different perspectives, and I don't think we're not here to expound upon them all. We're going to share from our experience and just give a few thoughts. But we are people of faith, like you said, and we believe that that's important for our recovery because, people's worldview is significant. And it's the way in which we see the world. It's the way in which we see and make sense of our lives. And so we recognize that different people have different beliefs, but this is ours, and we think that it's significant. So I've got a few thoughts here. The first thing that we can kind of riff on is I think one of the first reasons why I believe faith is really important in recovery is that first we all need a purpose. We need a purpose. There's been so many books written on purpose. One of the highest selling books of all time is a Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren. This idea of purpose is significant. It's important. Just this idea that my life has meaning. If we just pause and think about that for a minute, I think what I notice with myself and others, and when I interact with people that are in the throes of addictive behaviors, is this very nihilistic outlook on life. And by nihilistic, nihilism is just a philosophical term that means, life is meaningless. And so many of us, consciously or unconsciously, kind of live our lives that way, that everything feels meaningless, it's not going anywhere, and that's no way to live life. And I don't believe it's true. But I think, unfortunately, when you're living in a survival mentality, or even just you're trying to live day to day to just make it. And often people in addiction find themselves there because they're so preoccupied with the addiction that life can feel meaningless. And faith introduces, by definition, purpose. That there is meaning, that your life does matter. And so I think that's really, really significant, and where I wanted to just kind of launch out first.
Yeah. And the nice thing about, one of the unique things about Christianity and Jesus in particular is when he was asked, like, what are the most important things? Purpose in life is to love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. That those two things have there's so much behind that, because it's saying that, like, I have to love God, he loves me, but loving God in a way, not like I am loving a ruler or something who isn't connected to me. It's a love that there's like a familial aspect to it. There's something that, like, I am loving someone who cares deeply about me. And because of that, I am then able to love my neighbor as myself. So loving other people, being a part of something bigger than myself. So it's not all about me. It's about how I live and how I serve and love others. But at the same time, it is not just the world isn't made up of just you and God. It's a lot of people. So there's this implication that if we're living genuine lives with purpose, we will be caring for others, and we will be being cared for by others. Because that's how God designed all of us, believers and non-believers. He gave all of us a desire to want to be in a meaningful community that needs me, that values me. And that's how he made us. So that is, like, there's purpose right there. It's like, well, I don't know what my purpose is. It's like, well, figure out, it's like, what does it mean for me, for you today? To love God well, and to love your neighbor well, and as yourself. So it addresses all these things. Like, I need to make sure that I am respectful to myself. Like, there's a lot of work there. I need to be respectful and kind to those around me. There's a lot of work there. And then I have to understand that this guy, Jesus, loves me in one of the most beautiful ways, because there is nothing more beautiful than someone sacrificing their lives for someone. Like, that is ultimate devotion. That's the person that we're loving, that we are loved by, and that we are following. So there's a lot of purpose just in the statement of, when Jesus was asked what's the most important thing, it's to love God and love your neighbor as yourself.
I think, just from a high level perspective too, it's significant to recognize that our lives have purpose, because if our lives have purpose, then that means our choices matter. And there's been a lot of words written about the fact that if there is no God, and if our choices don't really matter, or there is no ultimate purpose other than what we create, it does create a nihilistic perspective on life, a meaningless perspective on life. words like love are just words that we create. They don't really have meaning. And I think that is such a lifeless way to live, which sounds funny, but it's hard to live without purpose. I think human beings need purpose. I mean, there's a proverb about, when we lack vision, we perish. And I think that's so true. If we can't look out into the future and see something better and see that this is all aimed at something good, then it's going to be really hard to muster up the courage to work towards it. And so purpose is really important. It's really significant.
And everybody has it. Everyone has it. It's something that we all have, and it can't be taken away. It can be adjusted, but it can't be taken away.
So faith gives us purpose. The second thing, and you ran with this already quite a bit, but I think faith, we all need a moral framework. We all need a moral framework. Faith gives us a moral framework. In other words, what is good and what isn't good, right? Who gets to decide? Well, this gives us a framework for that. What is right? What is wrong? What does it mean to be a good citizen and a good neighbor? I'll read from Jesus' words in the New Testament of the Bible, Matthew 5:43 through 47, where he says, You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? And so again, Jesus is introducing a moral framework, which is incredibly helpful to live in this world, to have some sort of moral grid.
Yeah, and it's one that, when you think about it, it's this idea that it only works if we're doing it together. Like, there's a reason why, like, when Jesus was saying those things, he was saying it to a group of people, Jewish people, who were being militarily occupied by the Roman Empire. So the enemy was around, like, it was there, like they were walking around, like we could see him. Like, there was a very visible difference between a Roman and someone who lived in Israel at the time. Like, you could tell, like, who's a Roman, and you guys are telling us how to live. Like, we knew who the enemy was. There was no, like, well, there's like a secret one, or there's no conspiracy. They're here. They're killing people who don't do what they say. So, like, it's obvious. And Jesus has the audacity to say, not only love the people in your family, which you should do. And that's important. That's really complicated because families are messed up. But Jesus gives us this moral framework of not only will the people who follow me love those who love you, but you are going to love your enemies as yourself. Like, that's mind-boggling. That's what it means to be a good neighbor, is to work to create a world that's good for those who wish harm on you, who want to hurt you, who don't believe like you. That's huge. Like, that gets me excited about wanting to create something around us, that all the guys listening to this, like, you are a part of a community that your goal is to create a better neighborhood that you live in, just with that, just being a loving person. If you need a purpose, there's a really good one. Like, wherever it is that you're going to go back to, or while you're here on the West Side, just love your neighbors really well. And who's your neighbor? Everybody. If it's not you, they're your neighbor. How do you do that well? And it's not about going around loving everybody. It's loving the person who's in front of you. So I could keep talking about this. This is a really good one.
Yeah, and it gets confusing in our society because we do have to leave room for people that have different frameworks than we do. But 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 it's also really good to be able to be unified and to be all one with people who share similar worldviews, because then you're able to help each other grow in that direction. And Christianity, right, has introduced a lot of great ideas into the world, and I think that by coming around those ideas, having shared purpose, but also having shared moral framework, that allows us to help one another move towards a shared vision and ultimately flourish, not just as religious people, but as human beings. And I think that there's a lot that's been written in the last decades about how morality is something we make up. And what that's led some people to do is just become incredibly self-focused and selfish, and that ultimately doesn't lead to the good that we hope for in the world. And it honestly, especially in recovery, I think it exacerbates the issues at hand. Um, which ultimately leads to our third point, and then we can just kind of riff for a while. But you've already alluded to this one too. So the first one, right? Like faith gives us purpose. Faith gives us a moral framework. But faith, we can all find happiness only when our search for happiness is broader than merely our own happiness. So, in other words, happiness is most often found when our pursuits include others. And faith gives us a framework for that as well. That, man, just what Jesus said in Matthew 5, to love your enemy as you do yourself, to love your neighbor. So there's the category for men. I'm only going to find myself whenever, like Jesus gives this paradox of like, you find your life when you give up your life. And so when I think of my family and friends and community and church, advocacy group, whatever, we think of Christianity historically. What a lot of modern people don't recognize is that Christian spirituality introduces the importance of ideas like justice and compassion. The idea of justice didn't exist before Christianity. The idea of our modern ideas of justice, anyway, and compassion, those are rooted in a Christian worldview historically, which is significant. And so our faith not only gives us purpose, not only gives us a moral framework, but our faith recognizes that in our pursuit of happiness, we will only find happiness by pursuing it, including other people, and it not just being about me. And unfortunately, with people in addiction, everything ends up revolving around me, right? Getting my fix, getting my needs met. And many recovery groups can become just self-focused. But we recognize, and what faith introduces is that happiness and that sustained peace is only found in community and relationship with others. And I think that's significant.
Yeah. It's a good check on, like, we can feel this pressure of just those first 2 points you made. It's like, man, I have to make sure I'm doing something that's important, doing something that has purpose, and I want to make sure that I'm doing it right, doing it well. A really good way to make sure that is getting other people's feedback, talking, like helping someone else figure that out also. So it's a refining process that you're not going to have this aha moment, and then whatever it is that you think right now, that's what the rest of your life is going to look like. Like, that's not, like, that it's not realistic because we are always progressing. We're always either improving or declining in some way. So what you're thinking right now about your purpose and how you think through things morally, that is going to change. It's going to mature. And what a really good way is not only doing your own work, but you're working with other people. So you have to have that. Like, it's why God made us to need each other. So it's like, if we all have this purpose individually, that we have this, then we have this like understanding of what we agree on and understand what we don't agree on. We're only able to understand those things if we're talking to somebody. Like it's like a moral framework it's pointless without other people. So does that make sense? And I hope I'm being clear on that. We're like, they build on each other. If we have a moral framework, who is that for?
Yes. It's for each other. It's so we can exist. And if you're a skeptic, right? I mean, this should be helpful just in the sense that like we need as a society to function well together. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest challenges in America right now is the level of distrust and disunity that exists across the board. We're not leaving a lot of space for others that don't have the same perspective we do. And I think it would serve us well to ask more questions and be more curious of others and leave room for others, because the tribalism, the judgmentalism, the rigidity is not serving the common good very well, because there's so much fighting and there's so much anger. And the reality is, if we're going to function, if we're going to have all the blessings of life that everybody desires, there has to be a level of camaraderie and unity. And the beautiful thing about faith and recovery is, again, it creates a shared purpose. It creates shared moral framework. It creates this sense that, oh my gosh, it's not just about me flourishing, but it's about others flourishing. Because if others flourish, I flourish. We all flourish. And that's how we can move forward together. And that's why I think God instituted what he instituted. I think that's why Jesus said what he said in Matthew 5, because he knew that was the case.
Yeah, because the solution to tribalism isn't to get one tribe to agree with the other. It's to realize that those tribes should be porous. And it's to get people to understand each other, because there's certain things that people just aren't going to change their mind about. So your goal shouldn't be, well, I'm only going to talk to people who think just like me. That you're just going to end up being alone. The goal, and what makes this unique, I have some really good, like an example is I have really good friendships with people who I don't agree with on a lot of things that are important to me, but I enjoy being with them. And there are plenty, like there are people wherever you go, whatever room you go into, you should be able to have confidence in the relationships around you. They're like, we don't agree on everything, but we agree on some things. Like I'm friends with people who I don't agree with on the most important thing and what I think about who Jesus is. But I have really good friends who aren't Christians, because that's how God designed us. Because the goal isn't to get everybody to think like you. It's to live with this purpose, with that moral framework, and model what it looks like to others. And it's going to look different because we're all different. And we have to be okay with it looking different, because we really can't control what people think. Like, that's like, it's one of those things where, like, depending if you're if it's politics and people are going to get like really upset about what someone thinks, because that's kind of what politics is. It's arguments about how people think things should look, because it's usually not about like what's actually happening on the ground. People get afraid, upset, angry about something that is thought that's not actually happening. There's a fear of something that could happen. But a really good way to not be afraid of somebody is to get to know them. Be understanding, ask more questions like what you're talking about. And that there's something rejuvenating about that.
That's good stuff, man. I think for anyone listening, and I hope this is encouraging. We there's a lot of different beliefs out there, but we've got to find ways to come together. And if you're at the refuge or around the refuge, I don't know where you're at on your journey, but my encouragement to you is be open-minded and press into this faith in Jesus, because if you don't have a faith tradition, um, historically Christians aren't perfect. We've made a lot of mistakes. Um, but I think what Jesus said and what he intended the church to look like is good, because we need more grace. We need more compassion. We need more love. We need more unity than what we currently see today. I know I need it in my life. And to be able to have purpose, to have a moral grid that's going to lead to not only my good, but the greater good, and to ultimately find happiness when I'm not just selfish and I'm trying to find, thinking about my family, thinking about my neighbor, thinking about the people I work with, I think is really important. Because if we all get better, then that's going to be good for all of us. And I think that that's why faith, these are just several reasons why I think faith is really important in recovery. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Relational Recovery Podcast. We'll be back soon with a new conversation. We'll see you then.